Okay, so this year, the part of the parsha that I really didn't give much thought to in the past is the end of the parsha after Avram has found Yitzchak a wife, and we end that whole story. So then Avram remarries Keturah. And what hit me this week was the following. This is why I really wanted to think about this unit. Is, you think about the Avot, and the way I always thought about it was Yaakov is polygamous. And he just is, right? Right off the bat, he marries 2 wives, and then he marries 2 more. Yitzchak is monogamous. He's like the paradigm of a good relationship, right? I mean, you see the disasters with Yaakov, right? There's the constant rivalry between the sisters, right? And then the next 2 wives are part of the rivalry with the sisters. I mean, it's not a great situation. Now, admittedly, he didn't want to get into this situation. It's Lavan's doing, but it's not a great situation. And maybe a share for another time is that the parsha of Isha Shnua, the beloved wife and the hated wife, seems to be playing directly on that parsha and talking about the dangers of such a relationship. And Yitzchak is like the great paradigmatic, monogamous marriage in Tanakh. But Avram was also like a begrudging, right, bigamist, right? Meaning he is, right? He's married to Sarah. He doesn't really want to be married to Hagar. But he is, and you see the tension that's created from that as well. And then he gets married to another wife, he gets married to Keturah. But Chazal, I don't actually believe that that's how you should read the Torah at all. And I think that Chazal, and even not Chazal, even in Pshat, there's a good argument to be made that that's not true. That Yaakov is polygamous, but Avram, from the vantage point of Tanakh, is basically monogamist. Right? How is he monogamous? He has more than 1 wife. Right?
Well, they were clearly secondary.
So you could say it's secondary, but I think it's actually more than that. So it's secondary, but I think it's even more than that. Keturah, right, just in Pshat, is essentially a nursing home wife, right?
An afterthought. Right,
meaning it's not just secondary, meaning it's after Sarah died. I mean, the fact that he's married to Keturah doesn't make him not monogamous. Right? His wife has passed away. He remarries her when he's 140, right? Essentially, right? Like, that's not, right? So he is married to another wife, but it's after his wife has passed away. So it's sequential rather than simultaneous. Correct, and we'll get to that in a minute. But now Hagar is obviously a bigger issue. But the truth is that it's not, because I don't know if I mentioned this here. I mentioned this to my guys in Yeshiva. Is that if you look at the Code of Hammurabi, the Code of Hammurabi tells you, right, says that there was a standard procedure in the ancient world because you didn't have IVF, right? So you didn't have surrogacy. So what did you do? So if you have a wife who is barren, so she is allowed to give her maidservant to her husband to have her child. And the child, from a legal perspective, is the wife's, not the maidservant that marries the husband. Meaning,
does the maidservant marry the husband?
So it's not considered marriage, right? It's a certain concubine. Correct. Now, what's fascinating, this is part of the Hagar story, is that the law in the Code of Hammurabi is that if the wife's maidservant, after she has the child, comes to view herself as her mistress's equal, so if she continues to treat her mistress basically as her master, so then we leave her alone, right? She gets treated slightly better than the average servant, and fine. But if she starts treating her mistress as her equal, because she thinks that now that she has bore the heir, that she's the equal to her master, then she gets put back into slavery to show her place, right? Which obviously sheds light on the Sarah Hagar thing, because that's exactly what happens, right? Hagar doesn't marry Avram, right? Is with Avram, and then she vatekal gvirta ve'ina. So as Yoshi Farajun points out, what is her? She takes this law in the Code of Hammurabi and she makes it worse times 2. Right? Because the law in the Code of Hammurabi is if after the child is born, she treats her mistress as an equal. But Hagar starts treating Sarah badly from conception, and she doesn't treat her as an equal, she treats her as inferior, because it says, now. She treats her lightly. So when Sarah says to Avram, I'm angry at you, and Avram says, take her back and do what you want, right? And she, Vatana, right? That was actually the law in the ancient Near East. That was what you did, is if the maidservant didn't realize that her place was as the surrogate, but thought that she was becoming the wife, so you had to make it clear that she was a surrogate. Right? And you see that clearly with Bilhah and Rachel. That's how Rachel viewed it. Right? Is V'ibana, I will be built. Not she will be built. I will be built through her. So when you think about it from that perspective, you realize that Avram really is, in a deep sense, right, only married to Sarah. Keturah he marries later, and Hagar is the surrogate for Sarah. It doesn't work out because Hagar doesn't treat herself that way, and that's what causes the friction. But fundamentally, the relationship of Avram, from the vantage point of Chumash, is only Avram and Sarah. Right? Now, Hagar is interesting. So now, coming back to why I was thinking about this, right? Chazal say Keturah is Hagar. And they say that Yitzchak went after Sarah died and got Hagar back. And that's Keturah. Why is she called Keturah? She's called Keturah because her actions were nice, like the Ketoret. But Chazal, right, are picking up on this, and they're minimizing his wives. And what are they saying? What are they doing? They're saying not only, right, was Hagar, right, Avram really, really, really limited the number of wives he had, and even when he wanted to remarry, Hagar who was part of his marriage with Sarah, right? Once Sarah dies, so he replaces her with the servant that Sarah had given him, right? Meaning he never goes and just marries another wife, right? Yitzchak says the only way to console my father is to bring back the person who was given to my father by my mother, right? And that's really how they're viewing it. That everything is about that relationship. Hagar, right, is sort of right from that earlier era, and he's just continuing it. But so once I was thinking about this, I wanted to sort of think about the Keturah story, because the Keturah story is weird. Yeah.
One point of this has been Josh. Remember now that she's a princess in her own right.
Hagar.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, Chazal see Hagar as being the princess of Egypt, right? That she comes after she's the daughter of Paro, and she comes after the whole story with Sarah.
So, why is she in and he then explains the attitude.
Well, yeah, so Chazal say that, she had the feeling that it's better to be, right, they say this about many people, right, it's better to be member of Avram's family than be a king, princess somewhere else. But yes, obviously that creates a weird dynamic of sorts. But the whole story, even with this, the story is a bit weird. I mean, what exactly is going on here? Meaning, okay, so he marries Keturah, but there's a lot of problems. Meaning, okay, he marries Keturah. It is a bit weird that he gets married at 140, but Rav David Tzvi Hoffman says that's not so weird, because he lives to 175. So, by pure mathematics, right, if an average person lives till 70, right, so 35 years for 175 is 1/5 of his life. So he said 1/5 of his life. The average guy lives till 70 means that he's marrying his second wife at 56, right? So that's not crazy. Meaning, if he's 140, fine, but realistically he's living another 35 years, so it's not totally insane.
Well, he doesn't know that.
What? He doesn't know that, but he says okay, so
Our time around.
yeah, he said okay, people were living a long time, so whatever,
I might die tomorrow, I might die another 50 years, still being married.
Yeah, right. So he says not crazy. What's crazier is that, and this is what all the Mepharshim pick up, and this is what really drives them nuts, is that the Torah makes a huge deal of the fact that Avram gives birth at 100 and Sarah is 90. But then he's 140 and he takes another wife, Keturah, and even if she's Hagar, and then what happens? Right? He's like, no problem, like nonchalantly, right? Suddenly he has another 6 kids. Right? I mean, the Torah spends the whole time saying it's like a miracle that he had a child at all. He had one at 86, right? He had one at 100, but at 140 he has 6, like nothing. What?
It was on his Sarah.
Well, no, also him, right? She says, "My Bali Zakein." Still, it's fine, but the Mefarshim are still like, come on, like this is like impressive. It's like 6. It's not like 1. It's like it doesn't even.
What's the drink?
What?
What's the drink?
It's okay. And then
The soda's flat. The seltzer.
Do you want seltzer?
if it's flat, sure. And then.
It is. I tasted it already.
And then you've got to wonder, okay, so this pushes against the notion, right? The simple shot I would have thought is that, again, this is his nursing home wife, right? He's elderly. He doesn't want to be alone, so he remarries. That's totally normal. But like he starts a whole dynasty. Right? He has 6 kids, right? And then he sends them all away, right? Eastward, right? He gives them gifts. And then you got to figure out, okay, well, what exactly is going on? I mean, why is he doing this? And why is he not just getting married? Like, what? He clearly is getting married with the intent of having children, right? This is part of a plan. So what is his plan, and what's going on? And so.
I already had problems with my nephew. I want more kids here. Come on, go away.
I'm saying he had a problem with he had a problem with Ishmael. He already sent Ishmael away. Now he has to be married. He has 6 more kids after he's already bequeathed.
In the same area as Yitzchak?
Correct. Well, for sure not.
Same Hammer and Co.
Good. Now, so sending them away is easy because the Hammurabi Code tells us that the halacha was in the time of Hammurabi that if you married a pilegesh, you married a concubine, you had a choice. You were allowed to treat those children as heirs, and you were allowed to treat them not as heirs. If you treated them as heirs, if you kept them at home, then when you died, the presumption was they were heirs. If you wanted them not to be heirs, the law was you had to send them away with gifts. You had to treat them well, they were your children, but you had to give them basically their monetary inheritance as a gift in your lifetime and send them away, and that would make it clear that your only heir was the child that remained, or the children that remained. Right? So when you know that that's the law, it makes a lot of sense, because the Pasuk just says that in Pasuk Hey, Vayitein Avram et kol shelo liYitzchak, he gave everything to Yitzchak. Ulivnei afilak Shimon shel Avram natan Avram matanot v'yishalchem al Yitzchak beno v'odenu chai kedma l'eretz kedem, and he sends them away while he's still alive with gifts. Right? It fits perfectly. Right? So it's not hard. But then you got to ask, okay, but why? I mean, why is he doing this then? Meaning, I get that's the law, but why is he entering into this relationship? Right? If they're not going to be his heirs, then what is he doing?
Right, so what's their place?
Right, meaning, Mamanavshah, right? If they're his heirs, I get it. But if they're not his heirs, he's very clearly not his heir, so what's going on?
Well, you can read very simply into it and say he has a wife, he has an obligation. She has kids, what are you going to do?
Right, so it could just be.
They didn't stop having kids.
Correct. The only problem with it is that, okay, so then marry someone your own age. Right? Meaning, unless it's a.
Next to be so much younger? Say, hey, what's the problem?
Right, so it sounds like he wants to, right, build a family, right? Otherwise,
Or because it was her, you already knew her. The age difference in
so according to, right, if you think it's Hagar, fine. Okay. So this is really, the questions that we have to deal with. So, let me do this a little bit backwards. So some of the Parshanei Pshat are so bothered by this whole scene that they just say that the whole thing is out of chronological order. So some of like the modern-ish ones, Shadal student, the whole Moshe, and others, they just say, I don't understand. Avram, it was a miracle he had a child at 100. What are you telling me that at 140 he had 6 more children like nothing? Like I just don't get the whole story. So they just say that maybe it just happened earlier. Why does it not come up earlier? Because it's tangential. Like the Hagar Yishmael story is not tangential to the story; it's central to the story because that's the conflict. That Avram needs an heir, and Yishmael is attempted to be the heir, and then he has to get kicked out. But apparently, right? According to Moshe, they say it is that earlier in life, Avram had concubines. He really was, against what I said before, he really was polygamous. He just had multiple wives, and. Big deal, he had a bunch of children for them. That didn't prove anything. Hagar was the possible surrogate for Sarah. So that was drama. But he married some other concubines and he had kids, but there was no intention ever that they would be heirs.
Yeah. But it's clearly to save out Torah. It's like Chris talked about his going and save out Torah, right?
Well, he doesn't actually. Well, I mean, it's a bit hard because it says by Yosef, Abraham, right? Which sounds like this was after everything, right? It's hard, but they're so bothered by this that they just say, you know what, this is out of chronological order. It's tangential. It's not really important.
Surprisingly, because based on science, it's not a big deal for men to have children anyway.
Right. I mean, they're not necessarily the healthiest children, but at some point,
right?
But it's physically possible.
Did they live longer then? So
correct, and that's what Rav Yochanan gets at.
Chronological or not? Why is the Torah telling us at all?
So the Torah is telling us because it's like a parenthetical point.
I'm just
what though? Did he have kids?
I just think it's like.
Well, I mean, look, we do. I mean, the Torah does try to figure out like who the people are around, and these characters come up later on. Midian, these people come up. So the question is just where are they from? So the Torah just tells you, by the way, those are also Avram people, right? And that's why they're in the area. Right? I mean, that's why they're in the area, right? I mean, it's not like it takes so many psukim. The whole unit takes 6 psukim. So the Torah tells us, he by the way, he was married, he had children, and those other nations that you find around, Midian, all those people? Those are Avram.
It's almost like the Torah saying, we're done with you as a national, now we're going back to you as an individual.
If you read it chronologically, let's start non-chronologically. Now, so you could just say, look, he happens to be married to a bunch of people, to another person, big deal. Shadal doesn't like that. He asked your question, then why is it telling us? So Shadal says, no, he was married to another person. Given, it's not like a huge deal in the story of his life. Why does it tell us at all? Because there is a purpose. So he says, what's the purpose? God promised him, you will be Av Hamon Goyim. You're going to have a lot of nations come out of you. So the Torah tells you, by the way, Av Hamon Goyim. Right, Av Hamon Goyim means literally. Right now, there were a bunch of nations running around that were Avram. So they weren't so much in the story, but it's like a parenthetical comment at the end that when Hashem said Av Hamon Goyim, he meant Av Hamon Goyim, and therefore, just a few generations later, when suddenly you see Midian, who's clearly a powerful nation, right, another king that's threatening the Jewish people, right? Know that that's just another Avram family, right? And Ammon and Moab are his nephew, and then Midan and whatever, and all those people. So Shadal just says, again, it's not central to the story, but it's not central to the story, but it fills out the bracha narrative. Now there's this, on Allah Torah, they quote this, Y.M. Immanueli. I'm not sure he is. He claims that it's even more. It's not even just like a concubine, it's a wife, being medayik in the fact that the Pasuk says, Vayikach Isha, right? But the majority of Mefarshim don't take it this way, right? The majority of Mefarshim...
It's a random woman.
Right?
A woman, not a wife.
Yeah, he took a... Now some of them even suggest... Now the question also is, who is this wife? So some of those Mefarshim even say that he is that she might even be Canaanite. And they say it's not a problem because when Avram says don't marry a Canaanite, right, he means don't marry a Canaanite for who's going to be the right.
To perpetuate the line.
Correct. So it could even be that it's a Canaanite, right? Where else is he getting a wife? Right? We don't hear that he went anywhere. The Chazal are obviously trying to avoid that by saying it's Hagar. But in this drought, okay, they're big deal. So it's a third wife, and he's married to a local. But it was clear from the beginning that these were just right. These were not part of the main heir family. He's sending them away. No big deal. Now, this also explains why he has no trouble sending them away while he did with Ishmael. Because Ishmael was the potential heir as the surrogate for Sarah. Right? So he didn't want to send him away, like he had a different relationship with these from the beginning. Right? He might have been a Canaanite, it was just another wife that he had. The majority of the Mefarshim, though, from Chazal to the Pashtanim to Jubilees, throughout the ages, assume that this is in chronological order. And this really is at the end of his life. So I'm going to take a lot of this from Allah Torah because they summarize it nicely. But it does help us sort of understand what's going on here. So many Mefarshim say this is really a third wife, right? Many of the Pashtanim, like Radak, right, says this is a third wife. Why did he marry her? Like Shadal. He married at the end of his life, so he would be the father of many nations. Right? Meaning, saying the Shadal, they just think it's in chronological order. Rav Meidan adds to this something which is nice, and he says, no, it's not just that he wanted to be the father of many nations, but he sent them eastward. And he suggests, if you read the full article in the MBM, he says, well, look, we all know that Bisman Hazeh, right? There's like a very, it's something very grounded in 21st century. So we all know Israel's tiny, right? And we're in a sea of nations around us, right? And we know that creates a security threat for us. So Midan says Avram knew that was a possibility, right? Israel was never so big. So what did he do? He thought, my best chance at making my heirs have a safe land here in Israel is if eastward, meaning the Fertile Crescent, right, which was basically all of civilization, right, but really the Fertile Crescent, right, anything to the east, right, he didn't send them south, send them east, right, back home, right, towards there, if they were filled with his family's cousins. Right? So he said it wasn't just he wanted to be Av Hamon Goyim, but he wanted to be Av Hamon Goyim to the point that he could fill the Fertile Crescent with friendly nations, because it's much easier to be a nation in Israel if you have friendly nations around, right? So there would be his heir in Israel, and then there would be his non-heirs, but family.
That's the theory, because we've never had
Right, and that makes sense.
Correct.
Spread the message still.
What?
Spread the message. We're still going to be spreading the Avram's message.
Right. So that's from Midan's argument, that this isn't just Av Hamon Goyim. This is telling you that Avram wanted to have nations, and there was a political aspect to this, which is, let me have enough kids that, there will be a bunch of nations. That doesn't work out, because Midian is his child, and Midian is
also
biggest disaster we have in Bamidbar, right? Yeah. We'll get to that. I mean that, right? Even though you would think Meraglim would be worse, and it is sort of worse. But this is also sort of worse. It's not clear which is worse. So this is something. Maybe we'll get to this when we get there. When we get to Pinchas, right? We'll see that, just to sort of give away the end, but we'll have to maybe develop it then, right? 24,000 people died there, but what almost happened there?
Entire nation.
What?
Entire nation is destroyed.
Correct. V'lo kiliti et bnei Israel b'kinati. Meaning Hashem says that this. Remember, the plague had already started, and Hashem gives you at the end that Pinchas stopped it from being utter annihilation. Meaning this was almost the end. Right? It was that bad. Right? It wasn't like 24,000. 24,000 was what happened before. Was what happened before Pinchas stepped in. Because Pinchas stepped in. Had he not stepped in, it's telling you that would have been the end. Even after the Meraglim, right? We would have never survived it.
The ones who never participated at all.
No, because the pasuk says, had Pinchas not stopped it, right, the implication is I would have destroyed all of them. Right? Right? The implication is that it was almost the end. Right? That's how bad it was. Right, so Midian's pretty darn bad.
It's pretty bad too. With the Magaifa that has.
For sure, that's also. So I'm not saying definitively it's the worst. I'm saying but my point is it doesn't work. Right, Midian is pretty.
The Midian, instead of being a friendly nation, is clearly not.
But Midian says, that was at least that was the intent. Right, that was the attempt. Exactly. Now the Radak adds the sort of human element to it and says, in addition to that, part of it was just that Avram also wanted to be married. Like he was old. He wanted to have someone to help take care of him. Now, once he was already married to her, so he might as well have many nations. That's part of the promise. But fundamentally, he says what motivated him was he was not be alone. Yeah.
Well, he agrees with me.
Yeah. Now, Rav Avram ben Arambam says that the point of this story is to tell you that Avram kept his promise to Sarah that Yitzchak would be his only heir. Right? He says, right, because there was the whole drama with Ishmael where it was clear that Avram didn't really love the notion of kicking out Ishmael and taking Yitzchak only as his heir. Sarah had to force him into it. And this story tells you that, at least later in life, either he learned the lesson from Sarah, or at least kept his promise to Sarah, that even when he had not one kid to kick out, but 6, he kept his promise. So Rav Ben Aramam says the point of this story is to teach you that Avram... Now, who was I listening to this morning? Oh, right, Rabbi Alex Israel suggests to take this similarly. He says it could be that, until Sarah dies, Avram is always the nice guy, and Sarah it's good cop, bad cop, right? Sarah is always the one who makes the hard decisions to make sure that Yitzchak is the heir, and Avram just goes along with it.
That's what mothers do.
Yeah, but then, right? He notes that Avram starts being the hard-nosed person after Sarah dies, right?
To satisfy her still.
No,
what?
right. The Yitzchak.
Right, Yitzchak, he's going to make sure he has to get the right person. And he says, maybe part of the lesson of Chaye Sarah is that Sarah's legacy lives on. That Sarah dies and Avram says, oh, now I need to do everything that Sarah used to do for me, that I didn't have to do, now I have to do. So Sarah would have been the one who made sure that Yitzchak got the right wife, but Sarah's dead, right? So I've got to do it. And Sarah would have told me, right? Avram, I know you love your children, but you've got to make it clear they're not your heirs. So now Sarah's not around, so he does it. So to combine Rambam and Rambam and Alex Israel, right, he says that's what this story is teaching you, is that Avram becomes the type of person who can do that, right? Being maybe against his personality, right, his chesed, but he realizes he just learned from Sarah. Her legacy lives on. That sometimes you got to be tough to make sure that the proper legacy lives on. So that's how Rav Avram Ben Harambam takes it. There is a bit of a question on Mefarshim. When exactly did he give all his stuff to Yitzchak? Because he already said a few prakim earlier, that he'd given all his stuff to Yitzchak, and that was what Eliezer, or whoever the Eved Avram is, had told the family of Rivka, that Yitzchak is already, right, not will inherit, but already has inherited. So it's a bit of a question, right? Does that mean that he only promised it before, and then he's only actualizing it towards the end of his life, which is how Rashi understands it. But be that as it may. Yeah.
No, it's just so interesting how they put it in there, because I'll say Shtar Matana. Showed it, right? And now it's really?
Yeah.
And then that's why they say that Matana are spiritual.
Well, right, Rashi says it's spiritual.
That's thing.
Right, that's what they're doing, because they're saying it's Kol Asher Lo. Right, Chazal will say he gave them, right, like Shemot Tatuma, right, they're clearly taking it Kol Asher Lo Yitzchak. He already gave everything, he has nothing left to give them. Correct, that's where they're coming from.
Right, I never realized.
Now obviously, who is the wife? So again, right, many of the Parshanei Pshat just say, look, it's a third wife at the end of his life, and that's in Radak, Abarbanel, Rabbi David Tzvi Hoffman, Jubilees, right? Jubilees, right? Well, yeah, Chazal say it is Hagar. Now who was it who said this? Right now, why would you claim it's Hagar? So Al Torah gives it sort of a very rational explanation for it, which is that they were motivated because of the question of why would Avram get remarried at 140, right, and have all these kids? If you say he's just bringing back his old wife, it's less of a question. He was already married to her. What? Oh, whatever. Meaning, companion. It was someone he already knew, right? Now it was Rav Hirsch. They don't quote this, but Rav Hirsch has this beautiful little shot on it. Rav Hirsch says, what are Chazal teaching you by saying that Yitzchak brought Hagar? Because Chazal add a twist to this, and they say it isn't just Hagar, it's that Yitzchak, right, when Rivka comes, is at Be'er Lachai Ro'i, which is the last place we'd heard that Hagar was. And therefore Chazal say that Yitzchak went to find Hagar and bring Hagar back. So Rav Hirsch says what Chazal are teaching you, as he says, I don't care, right, Rav Hirsch says, I don't care if this is Pshat, I don't care if this is Drash. Right? He says, too often you see children, their parent passes away, and they more care about their deceased parent's legacy than their living parent's happiness. And therefore, they get very tense if their parent wants to remarry. So Chazal are trying to teach a lesson by saying it's Hagar. He said, I don't know if they really mean it's Hagar, but what they're teaching you by saying Yitzchak went to get Hagar is that even, right, if Yitzchak could go and get Hagar, who had challenged his inheritance by having the son, right, and he'd gone through all that drama, but he could say, look, my father needs a companion, and Hagar is the best person, and can put aside his pride and say, I'm going to do what's best for my father, then children for the rest of history should learn the lesson that, your parents deserve to be happy too. And, he said, you're never going to have a case where the wife you bring is more of a challenge to you than Hagar was to Yitzchak. So Chazal, by saying that it's Hagar, are teaching you. He said, very rarely does anyone ever say this. Isn't it? Rav Hirsch says, he says, I don't care if it's Pshat or Drash. He says, even if it's Drash, why are Chazal saying it? Chazal are saying it because already in their time, children didn't like when their parents remarried. So Chazal were teaching a lesson that you should be okay with it. You should care about your parents' happiness. If Yitzchak could bring back Hagar, you can be okay with your parent remarrying whoever it might be. That wasn't the lesson. Now, what status is she? So obviously, so it could be that they're both pilagshim. It could be that one is a wife and one is a pilegesh. It also may depend on the timing, because she's described as an isha, right? As opposed to Hagar was not. Right, and this is where they point out that if you think, again, one of the benefits of this whole thing is that it really does highlight if by saying Keturah is an isha and Hagar is not, the upshot of it is that Avram is monogamous, right? Because really, Avram's willing to marry other wives, but he waits till Sarah's dead. While Sarah's alive, he won't marry an isha; he'll only marry pilegesh, and only because Sarah told him, right? And therefore, he may have been married to 3 women, right? But by highlighting that only the second wife, or the third wife, was a wife, and Hagar was not, it's playing on the fact that no, Avram's really monogamous. You're missing the point. He really is, right? It's just that Hagar was the surrogate mother, or was supposed to be the surrogate mother for the heir. It turned out it wasn't necessary. And as I mentioned, right, Radak also says that this might have been a Kanani, and it wasn't such a big deal because he'd already fulfilled the promise. Rav Avram ben Arambam and Abarbanel also say that part of telling the story is that it highlights the miracles that go on in Avram's life, right? That they continue even at the end.
Is it more miracle or more like talk about the hashgacha that Hashem
right, hashgacha
challenged Avram not to, and it was more.
Yeah. Now another possibility of why we hear this story, according to Chazal, is if you think it's Hagar. So I saw Jonathan Sachs suggested this in his email today. He suggests that the reason that Chazal identified Hagar is to soften the blow of Avram's original expulsion of Hagar. Right? By saying that he brings Hagar back, it's emphasizing that it was like,
It wasn't personal.
Right? It wasn't personal and it wasn't forever. It was because he needed to make sure that Yitzchak was raised. But once the kids are out of the house, and once Yitzchak's place is secured, he brings her back, right? And it softens the blow, because without that, you end up saying that Avram sent away Hagar, doesn't know what happened to her, and Yishmael comes back at the end of his life, but Avram never sees him, right? That's the pshat, right? That he doesn't know Yishmael's alive. He sends him off with a little bit of water, and that's it. So, just to sort of summarize, I hadn't really thought about this because, this is a little thing at the end, right? I remember once I always bothered my students in Toronto that they didn't know Tanakh well enough, and I would throw out minor characters. So one of them I said, okay, do you know minor characters? Do you know Keturah? And he says to me, he's like, how do I know Keturah? I know the main characters, Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov. I don't know the rest of Chumash. I only know my Bar Mitzvah Parsha. And I'm like, what's your Bar Mitzvah Parsha? Chayei Sarah. I'm like, oh my God, right? He says Bar Mitzvah Parsha. He doesn't even notice that Keturah is there. It's so ancillary to it. So why is it there? So again, to summarize, why is it there and who is she? So one possibility is, Shadal Hol Moshe, Keturah is the third wife that he married earlier in this story. Why do we find out about it at all? Either because, it shows that Hashem fulfilled his promise. He gave Avram a lot of children. And, we don't have to hear about it because it's not so relevant, but we want to hear about it eventually. Or it's there just to emphasize that even though there are a bunch of people running around, Yitzchak is the heir, right? He really does stick to that no matter how many kids he has. And therefore, obviously, according to...
You can come back into the story later.
Yeah. And it's clear now, according to these, that Keturah is not Hagar, because they're married to more than one at once. And then you're really talking about Avram as polygamous. But the majority of the Mefarshim don't take it that way, right? They either say this is a third wife that he marries at the end of his life, for multiple reasons. One, as the Radak says, because he's old, right? And he needs a caregiver. He needs someone to be with him. As Rav Hirsch notes, it may be Chazal are also teaching you, right? That we'll come back to the Hagar one. If it's clear, so he needs a new wife. Maybe it's a Canaanite woman because it doesn't matter. It's not the heirs. Why does he marry her at all? As a caregiver. Why does he have children? To fulfill his promise. And you learn a few things. One, you learn that Hashem fulfilled his promise and Avram's involved in being Avram and Goyim. Rav Medan's addition that maybe he doesn't just want a lot of nations, but he's trying to populate the whole area with friendly nations. It doesn't work, but at least that was the plan. And Rav Avram ben Rambam saying, no, it's not just that he has more nations, but it's that he has more nations and still sticks to his promise that Yitzchak will be his only heir. Right, so you learn all those lessons from this minor story at the end. Now, if it's Hagar, so what does that do? So, now many of these things are the same. Okay, so he remarries her, he has children, and he still maintains that Yitzchak is his heir, but it does accomplish a few other things. Right, one thing that it accomplishes in addition is by saying it's Hagar's, it softens the blow of of the expulsion. And again, Jonathan Sachs wrote this in this week's email, and he highlights the 8th century Midrash of Pirkei Elazar, who says who names, how does it work out? He names Yishmael's daughter here as Fatima or something, right? There's clearly an attempt to say that there was a reconciliation between Avram and Hagar, and therefore Ishmael, and therefore between Judaism and Islam, right? There was, 8th century, there already, it's sort of a historical component to it. And then there's Rav Hirsch's lesson, which is that Chazal may not have meant that it was Hagar, but in addition to all the things they're teaching us about Avram, right, that he's rebuilding, he's building many nations, and that he's making sure that Yitzchak is the heir, etc., etc. And in addition to maybe softening the blow, bringing Hagar back, right, Al Pi Drash, Rav Hirsch thinks that the lesson of Chazal is that if Yitzchak is able to bring Hagar back into the family because he knows that'll make his father happy, then that's a lesson for everybody down the road, right? To take your parents' happiness into account, as hard as it is to watch your father or mother remarry. They deserve their happiness also. So I just thought it was interesting to go through this because it turns out that these little psukim, both on the levels of Pshat and Drash, add a lot to the story in terms of the miracles that are happening to Avram, the fulfillment of Avram's promises, Avram's political plans in the area, and then the personal level, it sheds light on the nature of his relationships, to the extent he was monogamous, polygamous, to the extent he was really committed to Sarah only, which this may prove that he was, because he only takes a real Isha after Sarah dies, and before that he only takes Pilakshim, who are surrogate mothers, which highlights that really he was monogamous, which is an interesting thing. And then again, Rav Hirsch's thing, then a level of Drash, it also teaches us about the nature of relationships that we should have, parents, children, spouses, and things like that. So it turns out that there's a lot of interesting lessons packed into the Pshat and Drash of these psukim, and I figured for once in my life I should give it a little bit of its due credit, because no one ever does, including myself until just now. So